So, let's talk about Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. So, if you're new to the channel, I will just briefly tell you how I'm going to review the book. We're going to go for a general overview, so I'll tell you what I thought about it and generally how I liked it. And then we'll take 5 chapters and we'll break them down and look at the good parts in those, and also a bit of criticism as well. And then I'll do a final analysis where I'll tell you my kind of conclusion to how my views are on the book, and then I'll give a score and then maybe a little bit just justifying why that was the case. Yeah, that was good. Okay, so Chamber of Secrets. It's the second book in the series, and it does a excellent job of continuing that kind of world building that took part in the previous novel, as well as sticking with what has already been set up. So not like backtracking on some things, which quite a few sequels kind of do that sometimes, because they write something in place and then they realise actually they want to change it later, and they try and find a way to get around that. So, but this one managed to stick with that. It's got the introduction of characters such as Lucius Malfoy, who is mentioned before, but not properly brought into a fully fledged character until this one. And that kind of creates this kind of promise to the reader that things that are mentioned within the books aren't just there for a side, or just like there just to add to another character. Rather, there is more information about it. It kind of gives the impression that the writer knows everything, which is what I really like in a book, because I like to be able to like dive into more and pick apart different bits and stuff like that, as well as just have a lot more about a book. Especially if I like it, I'd like to be able to like go and read up about other things. But yeah, no, so that kind of creates that promise that there's more there. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take 5 chapters. We're going to look at them. Let's start with the Burrow. And the Burrow is a nice example of like taking the perspective of a full like wizard family and giving you what life is like for them, which obviously you won't get from the perspective of Harry because he lives with muggles. So it's nice to be able to see how a wizard family kind of operates, especially introduces things like Floo powder, which is just another aspect of bringing more detail to the world. And it also adds more kind of background to the Weasleys, who are one of the key characters, like the key like wizard families within the story. And yeah, so it adds more detail to them. You learn all about the other siblings as well, which is quite nice. What we're going to go for now is the Death Day Party, which, although people might not consider an important chapter, seeing as it was even missed out of the films, but it does one of those things where it introduces a character, which I'm not too sure if I'm happy with it like this, because it introduces Moaning Myrtle, which comes into play later down the line, of course, but I'm not too sure whether I'm happy with the character being introduced within the book just to then be used later. But then again, the counter argument could be that if they were introduced further, like in the first book, say, you might forget about it by the time it comes around and it might not seem as big a deal. So I can understand why she did it. But there's also a nice little scene I like, where Harry comes back from Quidditch, trailing loads of mud everywhere, and Filch tries to tell him off, takes him to his office, and he manages to get away because Nearly Headless Nick persuades Peeves to knock over a large object that Filch has to run away and sort out, and then comes back and can't be bothered to deal with that. Right? This may seem like a small thing, but actually, it's one of those things you pick up on a reread, because I've read these books so many times, and only now did I realise what that object was. And it was the Vanishing Cabinet. So the one that's in Hogwarts that ends up being put in the Room of Requirement and just left, that ends up getting fixed in the 6th one, gets broken in this novel as just like an off comment, which I thought was really cool because it's another example of how JK Rowling sets things up and that then have a payoff later down the line, or just like, especially on a reread when you go back to when you're like, and you can pick up on that. Which I thought was quite cool. It just shows how much has been planned of a novel, which, yeah, no, I really like that. Okay, so let's switch to the third chapter that I've chosen, which is the Duelling Club, because this is the chapter that teaches Harry the like important spell that he comes to use quite a lot, which is Expelliarmus, of course, the disarming spell. Yeah, and that's kind of like prominent throughout the rest of the series. It also gives more character to, well, more detail to the character of Lockhart, who is one of the best I want to say the best character in this book. I just like how, like, he's not a villain as such, he's just in the way, but it's just hilarious. I do like that character. And also introduces Parseltongue, which is they're kind of talking to snakes, and it kind of becomes more obvious to Harry that, and kind of sets that kind of doubt in his mind about whether he should be in Slytherin. And it's quite a nice thing to have that kind of inner conflict, like debate with himself. It's very cool. The fourth chapter I'm going to choose is purely on like detail alone. It's the Aragog. That's the chapter, and it's just a great scene that adds kind of a bit more kind of like fear to the Forbidden Forest. It's there, and I just like that chapter. I don't know why. It's just a favourite, especially with like the way Ron reacts with all the spiders. It's quite it's quite cool. And we're gonna go for the last scene, which is, well, the last chapter. Is it the last chapter? Can't remember. The Heir of Slytherin. This adds Voldemort's past self and like gives him a bit more of an identity, and also introduces the idea of a Horcrux without it being too in your face that that's what it is. It's kind of like subtly put in there, which will come into play later down the line. The whole book is based around like a Horcrux, but you don't know it until the later books. Although a problem with this is in that final kind of fight with the Basilisk and against Tom Riddle, there's quite a bit of plot convenience, especially with the Basilisk swishing its tail and just like flinging the hat to Harry, and then the sword appears. So, or the Basilisk biting Harry, and then Fawkes is instantly there to heal him. There's not enough. I didn't feel there was enough like tension on whether Harry was actually gonna die. It was just like, as soon as he's been bitten, it's like, oh yeah, now he's being healed again, and it just didn't seem like there was that much of a consequence in that. And then also the fact that Tom Riddle just stands there and has no idea what's going on. If he was if he was as clever as he was, he would know what Phoenix Tears do. But kind of like both, yeah, that end of that chapter kind of makes Tom Riddle seem a bit more like an idiot, as well as making Harry seem less capable, because it's all due to just things coming towards him, and just a bit of a shame. But it's a great ending to the book. So if we switch over to my final analysis, I'm going to say that this is a great book that continues to expand on that world that JK Rowling started to create in the first one. It doesn't ruin any character as such, because I know some sequels can do that, while they won't be able to keep their character consistent. And I really like the introduction of the whole Weasley family in this book, especially the kind of scenes between Arthur Weasley and the rest of his family, which is quite cool. But my only downside is that there is quite a bit of plot convenience in this book. And Harry never really does stuff himself. It's all just, I guess, going into the forest, but then he gets saved by the car that's now animate, sorry. Which is, yeah, so there's never really anything that Harry does himself. It's kind of a bit given to him, which is kind of a shame. But, yeah, it plays more into that kind of like fate rather than Harry's own capability. So I'm going to give this book a score out of, because we're going to change things up, because I feel like a 5-star system doesn't work with things like this, because all the Harry Potter books are like around that kind of 4-star kind of mark, because none of them drop down, none of them are bad. It's obvious they're good because they did so well, but I'm still, so I'm going to change the review system because I want to do it out of 100, because at least then that gives me a kind of way to, like, so a 4 or 5-star gives me 5 different options, and I'd like a little bit more leeway with that kind of thing. So we're going to go for an out of 100 score, and this will be a 78, because, like I said, there is that kind of plot convenience, and it's not as good as the previous book, but it still holds up in terms of continuing what's happening. But and it also, obviously it does then set up things for later novels, which is quite nice. But that kind of how it's like given to Harry, which is kind of a shame. But other than that, I think it's a good book. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.